Good evening. I'm going to get our dinner going. If I could ask people to take their seats. My name is Richard Joy, Executive Director of ULI Toronto. Welcome back. It's 2022 and we're celebrating in person again, and it feels great, clearly. I can tell just by the room's inability to sit down is a good feeling. This dinner is a wonderful representation of what the Urban Land Institute, or ULI Toronto, is all about. Bringing the broadest array of real estate land use professionals together across both the private and public sectors to shape the future of the built environment. As always, we begin with the land acknowledgement. I would like people to be quiet for the land acknowledgement. As a Toronto-based real estate organization, we acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, and newcomers in this generation and generations past. ULI stands in solidarity with Indigenous communities demanding action and accountability for the ongoing legacy of the residential school system. We also acknowledge and honor those who've come here involuntarily, particularly those who are descendants from those brought here through enslavement. Land acknowledgements have become very routine, and we might easily have them wash over us over time as we read them so often. And it's therefore important that we continually demonstrate through our actions that those words are values and that permeate all that we do in our professional pursuits. You can count on ULI Toronto to be an industry facilitator as we advance these values, but it is to you that we seek the leadership. Thank you for all that you do to make diversity, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation part of our industry's DNA. Before we move on with tonight's program, we want to turn to another very serious matter in the world today, the Ukrainian war. As a global city, Toronto is naturally implicated by this tragedy in many ways. Once again, our industry is stepping up to play a leadership role in supporting the multifaceted relief effort here in our city and in our country. And I would like to ask Mark Kindrachuk, President and CEO of Intermarket Properties and member of the ULI Toronto Governance Committee, to say a few words. Mark.
Thank you, Richard. My name is Mark Kindrachuk. I'm the president of Intermarket Properties. As Richard's noted, the Ukrainian war with mass destruction and death is very upsetting. This issue is very personal to me. Both sets of my grandparents came from Ukraine 120 years ago and immigrated to Saskatchewan. And they came from small villages outside Lviv. Our family traveled to Ukraine about 4 or 5 years ago. My mother, my aunt, brothers and niece stayed with our cousins in our village. And my mother and my aunt, who both speak Ukrainian obviously, just spoke to our 85-year-old cousin, and she hears bombing every night. And she says she just wants to die now. And that's the tragedy that's ongoing. And it's hard to hear about these atrocities and not be able to fight back. One of the things we can do here in Canada is work with the real estate industry to respond. And that includes the humanitarian aid to Ukraine via Poland and the real estate that's required for some of the shipping and marshalling, which we're working on. It's the other things like the refugees. Major landlords have stepped up and coordinated free apartments for the refugees when they come. We're working with different industrial and office landlords for, again, space that's required for the shipping of all the supplies. Airbnb is facilitating thousands of units for refugees when they come. Actually, one of the very interesting things they did is they allowed people to take space in Ukraine right now. I booked a 2-week visit at a loft in Kiev. And obviously I'm not going to go, but it gets money into the hands of the people in Ukraine, which is very important. It's too soon to know exactly how long we'll be sheltering refugees and the scale and magnitude, but it's not too soon to think how we're going to do this. Job banks are being set up now for the refugees. In Edmonton, as an example, the Edmonton Construction Association is working with the trades because they need a lot of trades in the construction industry, and PCL and others have stepped up and have committed thousands of jobs to people that come over. So there's lots of work to do because the GTA will be overwhelmed with refugees. It's the reality of the situation, and frankly, I think it's our duty to step up. So to participate in this effort, we are sending you emails with key links to offer support where you can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. That's really important work that you are doing on behalf of the industry and on behalf of ULI. So thank you again, Mark. Good evening, everyone. My name is Emma West. I'm a partner at Bousfields, and I'm the chair of ULI Toronto. It is so great to see everyone here in person, particularly because I think probably the last place that we all saw each other was here just about 2 years ago. And you know, the world has changed so much, so I am thrilled to see you all. I would like to acknowledge several elected representatives who are here with us tonight: Councillor Brad Bradford, Councillor Anna Bailao, Councillor Stephen Dasco from Mississauga, and Councillor Keith Irish from Markham. So welcome to you all. Veterans of this dinner will know that we plan the evening to be provocative, but celebratory as well. And as we honor our senior public officials who steer the direction of our region through what is uncertain times for sure, we want to say a big thank you. As North America's fastest growing urban region that ranks high for livability, we have always been well served by the planning leadership that we have in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. From provincial to municipal, for all our tensions and challenges, we have a culture of planning excellence. And so for that, we say thank you. Our dinner program tonight includes the names of senior public officials that we are honoring tonight. And I would like to ask them now to all stand up and be recognized. So I know you're out there at your tables. Please stand up so that we can say a big thank you. So before I introduce our keynote speaker, I would first like to invite the global chair of the Urban Land Institute, who happens to be a Canadian as well, Peter Ballen, who is also global head of real estate for CPP Investments. Peter will make a few very special announcements. Peter?
Thanks, Emma. As ULI chair, one of my privileges is to attend events like this, and I'm really thrilled to see so many people together in person. You should know that ULI is really thriving once again, and this is a great example of that. And now, when we were last here, of course, 2 years ago, we were just 2 months away from announcing, or from actually hosting ULI's spring conference here in Toronto, which was really a seminal event in the ULI annual calendar, and regrettably we had to cancel it. But I'm here to share the great news that we were able to reschedule it. Our local team did a great job of keeping things on our options open, and we are going to be hosting it again next year in spring 2023. And we just have believe there's a short video. I've seen that video a few times, and every time I watch it, it's like the first time I get excited. I gotta admit, Toronto, I moved here 25 years ago, and how Toronto has evolved, and I've seen it as an outsider, how it has grown into such a world-class city is so exciting, but it also, as it showed in the video, it kind of recognized some of the challenges the city faces and the opportunities. And ULI is really a great forum how we can take on those challenges and opportunities. And so it's this group that can help lead that. Now, speaking of leadership, hosting an event like the ULI Spring Conference, which attracts 4,000 people, is a big undertaking. And so it's my pleasure to be able to announce today our 4 co-chairs who will be helping us lead this initiative. In attendance, we have Ash Lawrence, Senior Vice President and Head of Alternatives at AGF Investments. And we have, and sending their regrets, very last minute, but truly regrets. Also chairing will be Cindy Rottenberg-Walker, partner at Urban Strategies. Ken Tannenbaum, Vice Chairman, Kilmer Group. And Alison Wolf, Chief Financial Officer and Global Head of Portfolio Management, Oxford Properties. Earlier today, I joined a kickoff meeting with the co-chairs, so I can assure you that they're already thinking about and working very hard to get this great program underway. But as you can imagine, it takes more than 4 people to host a conference. So I hope that we can count on your support to help showcase Toronto. And finally, before I hand the podium back to Emma, I have one more announcement that some of you may have already seen, and that is the appointment of our next ULI Toronto Chair. On behalf of the ULI Toronto Governance Committee and its Chair, Les Klein, it is my honor to announce that Michelle Ackerman of the Kilmer Group will begin a 2-year term on July 1st as our next chair. So Michelle. You'll be hearing a lot more about Michelle and her leadership vision in the coming months. Once again, ULI Toronto is in great hands. Congratulations, Michelle, and I'll pass things back to our great current chair, Emma.
Thank you, Peter, and congratulations to Ash and Ali and Ken and Cindy. We're thrilled that you've agreed to be the co-chairs of the spring meeting. And a big, big personal congratulations to Michelle as the incoming chair. I know she's going to be an excellent leader for the organization. So all of this is really exciting news for the region and really great news for ULI and ULI Toronto. So before we bring up our first speaker, I want to acknowledge all of you and thank our table sponsors for tonight's dinner and everything that you do for ULI. There are over 30 of you as table sponsors, and many of you are our annual sponsors as well. Your support has allowed us to do something quite incredible. ULI Toronto is now the largest chapter in the international network of the Urban Land Institute. And not only do we have the biggest membership complement, we are recognized as a leader in the implementation of the global mission, which is to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. So it's great news, and we really appreciate the support of our sponsors. So now to our first speaker. As mentioned earlier, this dinner is intended to be provocative, and in our speaker, I think you'll find that. With our theme tonight of balance, we acknowledge that there are challenges we must address, along with opportunities to lead. Planning for record population growth in a post-pandemic era with hyper-immigration, a constrained housing supply, affordability challenges, and a climate crisis are going to challenge all of our assumptions about what makes sense and what's possible. Clearly, the pandemic has shifted the way we live, work, and play. But as we do at ULI Toronto, we must ask great questions about where we are going. Are these changes permanent? Has the work from home replaced the long commute? Are public transit and transit-oriented communities as important now and tomorrow as they were when we were last here in 2020? Can we meet our commitments to the environment without sacrificing affordability? And can affordable housing supply and the crisis of that be addressed without compromising climate crisis objectives? How can we address one of the most severe housing supply shortages in the G7? And can growth take the form of compact transit-oriented communities, densified residential neighborhoods, and constrained greenfield expansion? So to get the conversation going on that, Kevin Eby will be tonight's first speaker with a short address before dinner. Kevin is the former Director of Community Planning with the Region of Waterloo and currently works as a private consultant with a focus on growth management issues. He was seconded to the province to assist with the creation of the original growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, was a member of the Greenbelt Council from 2018 to 2020, and has been undertaking research related to forecasting in the Greater Golden Horseshoe for the past 20 years. Kevin has looked at how to predict housing trends and raises some interesting questions as we contemplate how to move forward. After dinner, we're going to have Brampton's Yvonne Young, who will update us on the work that ULI Toronto has been leading with respect to transit-oriented communities. And then finally, we'll have a featured discussion with some of our senior officials on a panel focused on transit-oriented communities and residential intensification. So Kevin, over to you.
Thank you very much. And before I start, you've all got salads sitting there in front of you. Feel free to start eating them. I'm not easily insulted, believe me. The topic I'm going to speak on today is, are we planning for too many single detached units? And I want to start with a quote from Albert Einstein. The significant problems we face today cannot be solved at the same level of thinking that we were at when we created them. And as Emma said, we have lots of problems here in the GGH, and we need to think differently about how, in fact, we go ahead solving them. One of the problems that we're having is that we're planning for way too many single detached units. And that's not just a philosophical statement. We're actually planning for way too many singles. Why? Because the market is changing. And especially in rapid change, the forecasting methodology no longer reflects the future marketplace. So looking at the changing market, what you see on the graph in front of you is the percentage of single and semi-detached dwellings in the region of Waterloo from 2002 to 2021. The drop is quite incredible. But the issue that most people, when they look at this, think it's somehow to do with planning. And in fact, it's not. It's been the market that's changed. In fact, the first official plan policies that came into effect weren't until August 2015 when the board approved the regional plan. These came into effect, or the change was really aided by facilitation by the municipalities. And these, especially the cities of Waterloo, Kitchener, and Cambridge, stepped up to the plate as fabulous partners, worked together with the region on incentive programs, on implementation of rapid transit, on doing station area planning. And in fact, what we've managed to do is to facilitate the market change to deliver a broader range of housing and transportation choice for the people of the region. To look at another example, Holton Region, a sustainable Holton report done by a consultant in 2009 predicted a single and semi-detached percentage of 59% from 2006 to 2031 and only 13% apartments. And the report contained two quotes, and I want to take the time to read them to you. To achieve the growth plan target for 40% intensification, the housing mix will need to shift to accommodate approximately 31% apartments in the 2016 to 2031 time period. This major change in housing preferences represents a significant shift in the social and cultural values related to housing. It is unclear how or why this shift would occur in the Holton housing market. In the 10 years between 2011 and 2021, in fact, the market delivered not 31%, but 34%, and not just in the last 5 years, but over the entire decade. Things are changing, and they're changing everywhere. When you look at the data across the GTA, it's the same. When you look at the 2005 growth plan forecasts, and looking specifically at the 2011 to 2021 timeframe, single and semi-detached units were proposed to be 47% of all construction in the GTAH. The 2020 growth plan forecast, which was done 8 years into that decade, and so almost represents an as-built scenario, projects 28%. And that's actually high, considering what we've actually seen on the ground in year-end reports. So with this rapid change, one of the things that's happening is the forecasting methodology is no longer reflecting the future marketplace. And looking at Waterloo is a great example. In 2012, at the board hearing, the developers presented a market demand forecast that was 10 years into a trend declining, and yet projected a 64% singles. To mid-year 2021, in fact, we had already built 120% of the apartments that were forecast to 2031. When you look at Holton Region, going back to it, in fact, these semi-detached units, which occurred over the last decade at 35%, all of a sudden, what we have is a market forecast through a consulting report that's proposing 50% again. So we're actually starting to see housing forecasts which are saying, yeah, you did everything right, the growth plan was being implemented, but guess what? That's not right. We're going to go backwards. And in fact, when you take a look at it in the GTAH, it was 28% singles and semis over the last decade, and yet the growth forecast has it at 40% singles and semis over the next 30 years. Now, if the planners in the room can point me to any variety of conditions that says we're going to end up building 40% more singles in the next 30 years than we built in the last 10, I'd be awfully surprised. And in fact, when you look at the GGH, the one thing that people have said about the GTAH is that a lot of people have driven to qualify. They've gone out of the GTAH into the outer ring in order to buy more affordable singles. But when you look at the overall forecast for the GGH, in the last decade, there was only 33% singles built, and yet the growth plan forecast projects 45% singles in the GGH for the next 30 years. And in fact, if you take a look at what the growth plan forecast does on individual municipalities, in 18 of 21 municipalities, the number of singles and semis forecast exceeds the total number of households that are permitted in the DGA if the intensification targets are met. What you have happening is we've been told that the growth plan forecast is so much better than the Ministry of Finance forecast because it's implementing and taking into consideration the policies of the growth plan. And yet when you actually look at it, the growth plan forecast doesn't even conform to the growth plan. So taking a look, and I had to use this one just because it's rather stunning. This is a lower tier municipality development charge forecast. Basically, they forecast single and semi-detached units between 42 and 48% over a 20-year time frame when the lower tier municipality hadn't achieved even half of that as singles in the last 10 years. And not only that, there's not enough land in the municipality to build that many singles. But the methodology dictates that result. So why is this important? The forecasts are used in allocation of population to municipalities. And I'm not sure how many people realize that. The growth plan forecasts 56% singles in Durham. The only reason it's 56% in Durham is they forecasted such a high percentage of singles that they had to find someplace with land for them. And then they adjusted the migration patterns and assumptions to deliver population to fill all these units. And what it's done is you have population forecasts that are based on housing by type forecasts, forecasting too many singles, which means that we've got higher than realistic population forecasts in many municipalities. And where does this all play out? It plays out really in DC bylaws, where people are projecting way too much growth, and what they're finding is they're only collecting between 50 and 75% of the development charge revenues that they anticipated. The other thing it goes into is determination of land needs, and we're about to designate more land than we actually need. So the other thing I wanted to look at, and if this is something, if you're going to pay attention to anything I say, pay attention to this. We've been told that people are going to age in place. And when you take a look at it, and you take a look at the conditions under which people aged in place for the last 20 years, they are very different for the group that's moving forward. The housing is almost twice the size. It's 2 stories. It's 3 and 4 bedrooms as opposed to 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 bedrooms. And in fact, in Waterloo, we found that the very first part of the baby boom generation are selling their singles at a rate 65% higher than the generation before. And why does this matter? Well, it matters. Forget about age in place for a moment. 68% of all of the owners of single detached dwellings in the region of Waterloo will be over 80 years of age in 2051. That represents 77,000 singles. Now, forget about age in place because most of them will be dead in 2051, including myself. But if age in place also becomes a factor, take a look at the next line, which is 88% will be over 70 years of age in 2051. That's almost 100,000 singles in total that have the potential to come onto the market. And if you look, to give you context, the region of Waterloo only built 17,500 singles in the 15 years after the growth plan came into effect. This is a massive quantity of single detached units that are going to come onto the marketplace. And it represents underutilized capacity. It's wasting infrastructure. It really is something we need to address as planners. We need to focus on creation of housing appropriate for seniors at various stages of their retirement. And in fact, age in neighborhood rather than age in place has to be the way of the future. So looking ahead, the real problem we face is not a shortfall in single detached units like a lot of people are talking about. It's a shortfall in 2 and 3 bedroom apartment units. While aging seniors and younger people serve as a market for smaller units, families require more. But I would also say don't panic, because really, this is all part of the maturing process. We need the people financing development to believe there's a market, so they loan money on these types of units. We need developers to understand there's a market, so they take a chance on those units. So just in conclusion, we're planning for too many singles. It results in unnecessary expansions to urban areas, leading to planning for the wrong type of development in the wrong location. It results in under-collection of development charges. And really, probably the most important message here is aging seniors represent a huge market for builders. If you develop a continuum of age-appropriate housing, what we'll do is both satisfy the needs of the seniors, we will also free up a phenomenal number of singles for the young families that are growing in our community. Now, as we end this, let's all solve the 2 and 3 bedroom apartment problem. And thank you very much. Most of you have started eating. Continue on.
Thank you, Kevin. That was truly very, very, very interesting and gives us some great food for thought for our dinner conversations. Maybe there's something about the Waterloo in you, Kevin, that brings the Waterloo dinner out in our audiences. So as we head into the dinner portion, we're almost done here. We have a roundtable discussion for you to discuss over your meal. Up on the screen behind me is the theme, Balancing Act. Can we balance a compact, low-carbon vision for the region with massive population growth and achieve affordability and livability? That's not a small question. You may be talking about other things, but it really is the idea that we wanted to get stoked around the tables. So thank you all. We'll be back after dinner. And I'd also want to thank Oliver Bonaccini for their hospitality, and everybody, please enjoy your dinner. Hello. Okay, we're back. We've got our home stretch here. And first, I'd like to get everybody's attention just for a second, actually more than a second. We've got two final parts of our program. Our planners panel will come up next, but after Yvonne Young, who is from the City of Brampton, Manager of Urban Design, and has been part of ULI's Getting to Transit-Oriented Communities initiative over the last 2 years, very much one of the leaders of this initiative, and is going to give you an update. For those of you who may remember, Ken Greenberg spoke to this initiative 2 years ago, and we've done a lot since then, and Yvonne's going to speak for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to bring up our planner panel, and that will wrap up our evening's program, and then we're back to hanging out, and it's just amazing to see the energy in this room. So, Yvonne, over to you.
Good evening. Climate crisis, global heating, social injustice, and COVID-19 have accelerated our pace to innovate and collaborate. 3 weeks ago, Canada has declared reaching net zero emission by 2050. Canadian cities, including Brampton, have also accelerated their net zero goals by 2040. I'm Yvonne Young. I'm an urban designer, a landscape architect, a leadership in energy and environmental design professional. I'm going to speak about an accelerated collaboration model that the Urban Land Institute, the U of T School of Cities, Infrastructure Ontario, Future of Infrastructure Group, Greenberg Consultants, and the City of Brampton has developed. See if that works. In Canada, over 2/3 of our population live in auto-dependent suburbs. According to United Nations, well-designed, compact, walkable cities with good transport greatly reduce our carbon footprint. In Uptown Brampton, LRT has attracted over 22 million square feet of high-density mixed-use development, adding to the existing 37,000 population in the neighborhood. Over half of this population came from places that do not require driving or a backyard. Many of them are entrepreneurs or work in shifts, live in multifamily homes, and is looking for a new urban place to raise their family and also to grow their businesses. As a breakthrough, we developed an effective way to define a common understanding of the on-the-ground needs based on a walkable neighborhood geographic area for the 30+ stakeholders we're working with. Within 3 years, Uptown will transform through a number of new developments and new public facilities and transit projects. To meet this demand, we pioneer a living plan collaborative model, which is an ever-evolving 2D and 3D digital tools that enable developers, city departments, and agencies to test their ideas, assumptions, and technical performance at both development and neighborhood scale. This is pushing the envelope of guidelines, which enables our stakeholders to see and think beyond the contract lines. Also to have a platform to have exploratory discussion and solution testing through a TOC cohort that we host. Through this model, the conversation on parkland is beyond size and configuration, but it's on how to create a common ground to benefit both new and existing residents, creating public space for all. The conversation of height and massing is beyond angular plane, but it's on how to create a condition for daylight, views, viable at grade users, high-performance building that are dependent on how best to integrate with the immediate context. To ensure the whole family, including children, will have walkable access to school and other facilities on day one, we further push the envelope through the use of a hub prototype, which covers facility design for co-location, operation design for long-term tenancy, and resource design for an accelerated capital delivery that can potentially lower the cost by half. We introduce non-traditional facilities such as arts and culture and design, technology and co-work, as well as health and social to add education value for program integration, with a focus on lifelong learning, sustainability, design thinking, global citizenship, and creating green jobs for the future. This is pushing the envelope of facility master plan, using the hub prototype to think ahead and to design a service delivery model that is based on walk-to facility, as opposed to the traditional drive-to facility that are kilometers apart with costly parking lots. To make walk-to-school work, we developed a main walk prototype, which is setting the expectation that having cycling lane next to an 8-lane arterial is not good enough. We need high-quality, child-friendly walking and cycling infrastructure on day one so that families can have an affordable way of life to live without a car. This is also addressing 1/3 of the GHG emission, which is from transportation, and 3/4 of Canadian children that do not walk or bike to school. Going beyond Vision Zero, we create slow spaces with trees, plantings, and seating to address global heating, generate pedestrian foot traffic, and transforming our arterials into vibrant Main Street for all. The living plan model has enabled us to rethink height and massing, away from tall or sprawl. Also being intentional to extend outdoor season, optimize outdoor comfort, create healthy family-sized unit with natural ventilation, daylight access, and high building energy performance that is responsible for half of the GHG emission in Canada. Lastly, we are at the critical moment to turn this around. What's shown on screen in purple are neighborhoods across the city region that has experienced a decrease of household size over the last 5 years due to the lack of hard and soft infrastructure and family-sized units. We have a unique opportunity to turn these around into family-oriented TOCs, reprioritizing both hard and soft infrastructure and the delivery of family-sized urban living along these rapid transit lines to deliver an affordable, sustainable, transit-oriented city region by 2041, making TOC our competitive advantage on the global stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yvonne. If I could ask our panel now to come on up, and you'll be introduced, including our moderator, Andrew Garrett. I'll introduce Andrew, and then the panel will introduce itself. Andrew, come on up. So I'm very pleased to bring up Andrew Garrett, who's a former member of our management committee. He has had major impact on ULI Toronto, including helped launch and, in fact, found our mid-career program, our Kirtner Urban Leadership Program, among other things. Andrew is responsible for growing the IMCO's $10 billion. This is Andrew's, actually, I've got my notes. I should say he's the Senior Principal of Real Estate Investment Management Corporation in Ontario and the Conservation, and is responsible for growing IMCO's $10 billion global real estate portfolio to secure public pensions for Ontario families. IMCO is the only Ontario fund manager purpose-built to onboard public clients such as pensions and positioned to preserve the purchasing power of municipal reserve funds. He was recently appointed to the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force by the Ontario Ministry of MAH, Ministry of Municipalities and Housing. And it is really in that capacity that we wanted you to lead this conversation. So, Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Richard, for that kind introduction, and I invite the panel of chief planners to join me on the dais. So thank you for that introduction. And yes, so in my capacity on the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force, we got to connect with a lot of industry and get feedback over the winter break on some of the challenges to intensification and looking and having a vision. And for some of you that are familiar with IMCO, we intersect in this housing affordability in probably two major ways. I think one as an investor, as an arm's length investor in committing over $1 billion into family during COVID and looking at diverse types of supply. And secondly, again, we were talking about was preserving some of that purchasing power of municipalities who have these reserve funds. But I do want to cover, have our panel introduce themselves as they are really distinguished and have a lot of experience and have been front and center in a lot of these challenges within their respective regions. So I'll start to my left with Greg.
Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Lintern. I'm the Chief Planner and Executive Director, City of Toronto City Planning. Nice to see everybody.
I'm out of practice. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Carlavis Birch. I'm Chief Planning Officer at Metrolinx.
Hi there, Lisa Prime. I'm the Chief Planner with the City of Cambridge.
Good evening. I'm Steve Robichaud. I'm the Director of Planning and Chief Planner with the City of Hamilton.
Great. Really glad to engage with you all tonight. So I think I'll start with Steve, actually, and we were discussing this housing affordability issue. And for those who have gone through the report, the big punchline in it is the 1.5 million add in terms of units. And wanted to get your perspective as a chief planner. When there's a heavy focus, is it right to have too much of a heavy focus on number of units versus types and diversity of units? And wanted to get your view on what you see as really helping with this urban intensification.
That is a very good question, and it's an issue that we're sort of struggling with in the City of Hamilton. Based on the growth plan, Hamilton is projected to grow by about 100,000 households from 2021 to 2031. And when we were looking at how we accommodate that growth, one of the issues that came to the forefront was a unit is not a unit. If under the business as usual scenario, we'd be looking at the housing mix would be about 50% singles. With a small, modest urban boundary expansion, it would be about 25% singles. And then with the no urban boundary expansion, we were looking at 9% singles. But when we start looking behind how we accommodate that growth, in the City of Hamilton, we have more than enough space on a per unit basis, but it's the type or what those units are. So earlier today, I was looking at a site plan for a proposal, which was a twin tower proposal, 650 units, 8 units or 1% of the total mix were going to be 3-bedroom units. It becomes very difficult to accommodate the demand for the family size units if the market is simply being led by investor size units. Out of those 650 units, 640 are studio or 1-bedroom units under 400 square feet. That will not meet the needs going forward to accommodate either multi-generational housing or family size housing units, which is sort of leading to that further pressure for urban boundary expansions, or what we saw coming with the COVID is continued drive to qualify. So when we were dealing with the debate around whether or not we should expand the urban boundary, the argument was if Hamilton doesn't do an urban boundary expansion to accommodate family-size units, then that demand would simply go to Niagara Region, Halderman Norfolk, Simcoe, Brant County, somewhere else in Ontario. So we have to look at how we can accommodate through our planning instruments that full range of housing types, and whether that be right now we're having consultations on developing family-friendly housing guidelines, and then at the same time we're also developing guidelines or updating our policies around condominium conversions to protect that supply and stock of housing, in particular the larger units. We often see pressure to convert those larger 3-bedroom rental units into 3 1-bedroom rental units or converting them to condominium. So protecting our existing housing supply and then looking at incentives to encourage and promote larger units to be created, whether that's a reduction in parking or DC breaks or some other financial tools. That's an important consideration if we are to meet that full continuum of housing needs and avoid those pressures or minimize those pressures for urban boundary expansions. Thank you.
Great. Oh, thanks for that. I can hear the balance in that answer. There's that need for not just having, as you said, kind of maybe more investor, purely market approach, or not having too much of a pure planner approach where there's a high expectation of single-family homes. There has to be a certain tailoring per region. So I want to move over to Lisa Prime, right next to Steve, close geographically and on the stage here as the chief planner of Cambridge. I know you have a lot of complex experience in terms of planning in all facets, but particularly in the environmental side, you've been involved in green buildings and in brownfield redevelopment risks, low carbon tech. And what we're looking at in what is generally a look at a big push in supply and intensification, I'm wondering, can we still maintain some of our commitment to our environmental sustainability goals while still pushing to accommodate the demographics?
Yeah, great question. Few people have said I can't be provocative. So I brought notes, mostly to keep me on task, because I know we don't have a lot of time. But I think I can sort of lay out for you my perspective on sort of how we deal with housing and think about the climate challenge. So I'm just going to refer to my notes a bit, which is not normal for me, so bear with me. So we all know that, the IPCC reports that come out on climate change are telling us continually that we're not doing well. And I think that's a really important aspect, as we have councils who have declared climate emergencies. So there's a real issue there that we have to focus on. Canada has now a target. We have an act as of 2021, while we were all at home in COVID, to meet net zero emissions by 2050. So the mandate is there. We can debate how it trickles down municipally, but there's a lot of progress being made on official plan policy, on green development standards. This is stuff that I spent most of the past 5 years working on. But ultimately, I feel like on the housing crisis, which truly is a crisis, and part of what I'm very interested in what we do in Cambridge, we also have a climate crisis. And there's been little discussion about how those two things fit together, from my perspective. So I think we all know that the principles of sustainability and, frankly, good planning are things that marry together well when it comes to the climate crisis and housing. And we saw a lot of that dialogue through the time we had in the past couple of years. I think it's important to understand and to recognize, and I think we see some of that in what's been presented already, that the mix of housing is going to vary across cities and across environments on what is really needed. And the focus is very much on adding that gentle density and meeting that infill expectation and change, but also leveraging those important investments in infrastructure. And I feel like my colleague next to me is going to really hone in on that one. We equally have to do a really good job of creating walkable and enhancing those downtown and Main Street areas. And so for me in Cambridge, I've got a little triage of them, and it's a really positive experience to see how those communities will come back with growth. I think one of the biggest challenges we have in general on this topic, or these topics as they fit together, is overcoming the perception of private rights and educating on the change and the benefits of what amenities happen as we intensify and bring growth. And I feel, and I see this in my job now, and I think this is a big part of what we have to do to deal with. And as a municipality, I look at, as myself as chief planner, as that being a big priority for me. Education, we need better predictability, flexibility for industry, education of the communities and everyone involved. And we need ultimately to move beyond the perception, I think it is a perception partly, of what that North American model actually is. Because it's evolving and it's changing, and I think Steve has talked a little bit about that, and I think that is something that people need to come to terms with. Municipalities need to reduce GHG. They also need to address adaptation by design. These are really critical aspects, and this demands innovation. This means we have to move beyond natural gas, beyond combustible engines, and to a reduced carbon intensity for electricity. These are really important aspects of what we have to do. And we need more projects that we can partner on to find solutions that fit the environment that we're in. I'll use by example the fact that now I'm in Cambridge, where we have, high emphasis on source protection and aquifers for drinking water. Presumably takes away my opportunity for energy and geo-exchange, for example, like we were able to do in Markham. So the environment isn't the same across all cities, and we need to figure out what those solutions are to meet the housing mix issues as well as the environmental issues to get us to where we need to be. GHG analysis for growth, we need to start managing, understanding scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. We need progress on embodied carbon. We need to start to see successes in materials and infrastructure that's leveraging the sort of low carbon options. And, I can sit here and say that I feel like it was 15 years ago talking about low carbon performance-based procurement. I mean, this is stuff that should already be happening. And, I'm not sure how much further we are from when I started down that road. So I think based on my experience, industry can and will respond. Resiliency is a priority as part of the package. And I think what's really important is the diversity of housing is important to establishing resiliency and attainability. And housing needs to address attainability regardless of the debate about affordability or what. It's about attainability, it's about transitional housing, it's about having people find opportunities to move from renting into home ownership and finding those different unit mixes. And to the point on the presentation earlier, and then I will stop, trust me, we need better solutions that are attractive to our retiring, our parents, our aging community. That's where we have a lot of growth and things. It's not about smaller units it's not about condos. It's about stuff they want to move into. I can't get my dad out of a single family house. If you can't get people to see the attraction of loft units or innovative spaces, then they're not going to free up those homes that we need for families. So there's a really important piece there that has to happen. And I think I'll close it off and stop by just saying that, it's a continuum on how we deal with housing and how we deal with climate. And at the end of the day, we need to just all start, just do it.
Great. No, I appreciate that point of view. I think there is a lot to take away from that. Carla, I'll move on to you for the next question. We've been talking, and today I know you have a very strong civil engineering background and can really attack planning from a really kind of technical perspective and work on complex projects. But today we've been talking a lot about those kind of transit-oriented communities and planning from a real, I would say, a bit more of a move beyond the technical to be a real holistic view of how we start to marry these transit infrastructure into these suburban and urban areas, and wanted to get your perspective on how you holistically look at these transit-oriented communities.
Thanks, Andrew. So for us at Metrolinx, I think it starts about partnership, right? So we can't do it alone, and you talked about infrastructure, and you talked about the work that we're doing overall with communities, but for us, what we really want to do is, build the transit and build the partnerships with Infrastructure Ontario and other groups, the municipalities, the City of Toronto. We do a lot of work with community groups themselves, and really understand that the impact of transit is one that we actually want to also give back, right? So while we're building the transit, I think I saw a number up there, $61 billion in infrastructure we're spending in transit over the next little while. It's going to transform the city. It's not only going to transform this city, but the city of Hamilton. I live out in Durham and Ajax. And really what we're creating is an integrated network, an integrated, connected region. And while doing that, we understand the impact to communities. So that relationship with communities is one that we want to make sure that we understand that we are working with those communities to really bring back the benefits. While transit is definitely going to be the primary benefit that we give back, we want to make sure that we're supporting local businesses, that we're engaging with our contracting communities to really make sure that we're having jobs built in a diverse way. that we are really giving back to local businesses where they are being disrupted, that we really help them along through that build process and really make sure that they come out of it stronger or displaced, and we understand how that's going to be working. And then really partner, again, with municipalities and other programs in the government such that we can build the public realm back better, that we can help to support other community improvements. So what I'd say to the ask about, someone asked me, can you really deliver on transit-oriented communities? And what I say is we're not doing it alone. We're doing it in partnership with others, and we're really building that network to be able to support.
Great. No, I appreciate that expertise. And I leave the hot button question here for my friend Greg. We've had coffee on occasion, and I know that the recommendations really focused on a number of areas of intensification, but one of the 5 keys that they really pulled out was depoliticizing a bit of the planning process and figuring out how do we prioritize some of the values, and I think Lisa said it well as well, in terms of what's people's perspective of private rights, what's people's perspective of gentle density, what can we do, what's our vision for this going forward?
So I was interested in your challenge there about depoliticizing the planning process, and I'll cut to my punchline right away is that you can't.
You can't, okay.
I think that's a given that, and I think many of us who maybe went to and took a course in urban planning heard that all planning is politics. Land use, I call it land use politics, not land use planning. So I'll just make a couple of comments to frame the challenge. One of them is just about thinking about it as not a one-size-fits-all challenge. The housing crisis, it is, the region is made up of older urban centers, kind of first-generation post-European settlement areas, certainly all of the suburban rings of the region, and what's playing out there, and what has played out there over decades. And then there's kind of a third generation that's happening, which is urban infill and suburban infill, including transit-oriented communities. And I think that's a fascinating way to look at the housing challenge. It's not one story, it's not one place, it is not one set of demographics. And that's really important for anyone trying to pull democratic levers, I'll say, during both the provincial and municipal election. You've got to think about it through where you are in the region and your audience, obviously, and what's going on with the demographics. Another big background piece to this is that the municipalities are a creature of the province. We all have to remember that every day, that the feds and the province are in a constant tango. Some days that tango is going very well, some days it's not. And that local councillors and members of provincial parliament have constituencies. I don't think that's missing on anyone, but I think it's important to remember that as a piece of the housing challenge. I'm also going to say that we're in the age of anxiety, and we heard about Ukraine tonight. Inflation, for those of us who are old enough to remember, inflation is back. What's that about? The pandemic, of course, climate crisis, and inclusion crisis. All of these are background pieces to the housing challenge. Millennials outnumbering boomers now. They're going to vote this year, maybe. Well, how meaningful will that be? But they are your kids, they're your relatives, they are your employees. So critical to remember that in the conversation. And of course, waves of immigration that have come through this region over the last 10 or 20 years, and for many, many decades before that. The social cohesion and the economic success that comes through immigration, and now that will come through the millennial generation, is so, so important to remember when we're thinking about the conversation. And I'm just quickly going to identify a few quick things, and you might have other questions, but as you know, if everybody's a chief planner in the room, and I've made that challenge, I think, before on this stage, what do you have to bring forward in the discourse? Remember the spectrum of affordability, that the market itself is not going to bring deep, deep affordability without a government role. The spectrum of need, I've just spoken about that, but remember, you're not just talking about one thing here, you're talking about a whole spectrum of need, whether it be middle income wage earners or the essential workers that we spoke so much about during the pandemic. A new lens for housing, housing as a human right and housing as a public health necessity. These are types of phraseology that maybe not even 5 years ago we were talking about. Zoning, I love zoning. More as of right zoning, put your hand up. But with a purpose that challenges systemic inclusion. Tough advice, doing the right thing on removing these systemic barriers to zoning. That's what the conversation needs to be about. My friend from Hamilton here about accommodating growth within the urban boundary, and we had a speaker earlier who has history on the growth plan. I don't think we should forget about that principle. Making tough political choices. We have a policy-led planning system in Ontario. Let's use it. Let's use that system. Let's not be shy about it. Of course, for good, sustainable outcomes around climate change and inclusion. I'll say political directness. I'm not going to say political honesty. Political directness. The answer to the housing challenge means, I think, that everybody has to hurt a little to make sure everyone gets a home. I don't think anyone is going to disagree that everyone has a small price to pay on your taxes, on a financial arrangement, on who is going to be your neighbor, whether you have a multiplex next door or a 500-unit tower with homes. That's not a condo, by the way. It's a 500-unit tower with homes next door. So some really good, strong political directness around that. And really a discourse that speaks to the anxiety of our times. That is going to be something that I would listen for both through the course of the provincial election and the municipal elections in the fall.
Right. Thank you, Greg. Thanks for that perspective. No, I really appreciate you sharing your expertise and your views on these really important and timely topics. And I won't forget the tagline, I love zoning. So, Richard, we know what button to have for all the planners next year. But thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to our panelists. This brings our evening to a close, our formal part of our evening, but there's still lots of opportunity for people to hang out, and I hope you will. We want to thank, once again, all of our sponsors who, across the room here, this is a very, very important evening for ULI, and it would not be possible without your very generous support year after year. Thank you for those of you who are new sponsors this year. It's great to have you in the room. And thank you most of all to our senior planning officials across the region at the municipal and provincial levels. Your leadership at this time, as you've seen from our program, which we hope has provoked a lot of thought, is needed more than ever. And we really value that leadership, and we look forward to seeing all of you in a year's time at this dinner again. and many, many, many opportunities between now and then. So thank you all, and we'll see you next year. Bye-bye.